Hello, if you want to watch exclusive lemon content on What If Naruto, then go to my Boosty. The first link in the description here contains such hot stories for adults, such as What If Naruto was a daddy for Sarada, or Kushina and Mikoto vulgar Naruto mommies. Follow the link and enjoy. I'm waiting for you.
Well, without anything else to add, we can start with the video. An explosion wave where the jutsu had collided hit Naruto with full force and he was thrown across the field, landing hard on the ground in a cloud of dust. I was tired. Naruto coughed. A sharp pain pricked his chest and sighed. A bitter taste of irony irritated his taste buds. He tried to lick the blood from his lips, but he felt his tongue sticking to his mouth. I was so tired. The blonde Hinchiriki lifted his mangled body off the ground, ignoring the tense muscles, and the red liquid dripping from his numerous wounds. With some effort, he stood up, sinking his feet into the bloody earth to get the much-needed support, and straightened up. He was tired, but he wouldn't die crawling on the floor. Naruto let out a giggle, imagining the expression those two pompous Uchiha would have when they saw him get up again and again. Because even if he died, he refused to die as his enemy had ordered him. He would choose his own path, scratching it tooth and nail, as always. Naruto Uzumaki never gave up, even when he was completely exhausted. Kurama was roaring in the back of his mind, and although the young man could hear him, the meaning of his words escaped him at that moment. Naruto felt a constant ringing in his ears and an uncomfortable pressure on his skull that would not be removed. She pushed her wet blonde locks away from her face and grimaced at the sight of the blood on her hand. Looking at the chaotic battlefield with his eyes, Naruto felt strangely disconnected from all that. His chakra reserves were completely empty, and he couldn't extract more from the Kyuubi if he didn't want to kill his friend. Or, more likely, both of them. There would be no salvation without Kurama's healing. Tsunade, Bakken, and Sakura had already left. His blue eyes shot up as he saw a colossal shadow fall on him. Jubi was staring at him intently, with his huge red orb glowing menacingly even in daylight. Obituchi appeared on one of the beast's shoulders, while Madara, reanimated, was on another. A faint smile appeared at the corners of Naruto's lips. Both Yukiyas made fun of his obvious mocking gesture, and the next minute, chaos broke out. A huge black ball of energy began to form in front of Jumi's open mouth. Suddenly, a Susanoo rib cage appeared around Naruto. "Silly Sasuke," he gasped, unable to contain a tender smile. They had met just a few days ago after a year apart, not knowing that they had both survived the main battle, and had gone into hiding afterwards. Sasuke with his reanimated brother, Naruto with Kakashi, and the three reanimated Hokages, except the Sandaime, who sacrificed himself, so that the others could escape. Obito ran his fingers through a series of seals, but before he could finish, another Susanoo threw him off the Jirumi's shoulder. Naruto staggered, but remained on his feet driven only by his willpower. He looked briefly to the side, and saw a bloodied Kakashi on the ground, not far away from him, as he used his last strength in a vain attempt to crawl towards his blonde student. The one eye that was left was open and terrified, and the other, marked and closed forever. The latter's smile became a little more. Itachi's Susanoo slowly dissipated into nothingness. After an instant, Obito returned to his previous position, with the Menyekyo Sharingan rolling in both eyes. A water shield, courtesy of the Nigaime, enveloped the area where Naruto was standing in the middle of the barely formed Susanoo. From Sasuke, the young Uchiha was clearly pushing his last drops of chakra towards him. Madara's lips twisted into a sneer as she watched the battle impassively. The Rinnegan's eyes quickly moved to the side to find Tobirama and deal with him. The Jirubi roared, sending his Bijudama forward. "Naruto?" The young Hinchiriki shuddered when he heard a scream, charged with despair and fear, which reached his ears, overshadowing the ringing. A sudden displacement of air, a flash of blonde hair and a white coat. And his father was standing in front of him, his bright cerulean irises surrounded by a black sclera that oozed with worry. Thin and soft tendrils of red chakra unrolled from the inside of Naruto's stomach. and spread out along his chakra paths as a sign of unconditional support. Of Kurama for the last time, and also a farewell for his first true friend. Naruto couldn't help himself. A peaceful and genuine smile, absolutely unbecoming of this situation of imminent death, lit up his features. He knew that he was extremely selfish to be glad when everyone spent their last chakra fragments in protecting him instead of running away. However, he allowed himself this last pleasure of selfish emotions. Minato's gaze softened as he instantly understood the implication of his son's smile. There was no way to win anymore, and everyone knew it. Naruto accepted death, but that didn't mean he had given up. Enthusiastically accepting impending death was the bravest thing a shinobi, no, a mortal could ever do. Just before the black bomb of concentrated chakra of Jubilo was impacted, the Yonda and me hugged the young man tightly, wishing, not for the first time, to be able to feel the warmth of another person again, and reciprocate it. Having this body revived was a blessing and a curse at the same time. The moment the world around him collapsed, the last words Naruto had heard were little more than a whisper, but to him, they had resonated throughout his being. "I am proud of you, my son." And he was falling, Naruto realized, startled, and he had been like that for quite some time. How long did it take to get to the ground? It couldn't have been that far away. Naruto tried to open his eyes, but his eyelids were so heavy that they refused to move. He tried to move his arms, legs, or anything. Nothing worked. I also couldn't get in touch with Kurama. The persistent feeling of the presence of the old fox on the edge of his psyche, to which he was so used, was and cold. That sent waves of panic through him. Naruto couldn't do anything with his completely motionless body. And he kept falling. Now that the blonde guy was thinking about it, he couldn't hear anything. He should have at least heard the wind passing by his ears, but he was surrounded by a separate silence. That made Naruto uneasy, and then, in an instant, the stillness around him broke. He screamed as extreme pain coursed through his every cell. His ears and nose were assaulted by various senses, completely overwhelming his exhausted mind. Naruto could finally feel the wind on his skin just before he crashed to the ground, and his world exploded in devastating agony. As soon as he emerged from the safe haven of unconsciousness to some semblance of consciousness, the young Hinchiriki felt a familiar tug. That made him change direction and let himself be dragged inside the seal. "Brat." Naruto suddenly opened his eyes, and his sky-blue gaze immediately fixed on the huge figure of the nine-tailed fox, lying in front of him, his head resting on his front paws. The Kirib watched him with crimson, narrowed eyes, and a slight smile on the lips. "Kurama!" Naruto exclaimed with joy, feeling a great relief. With a few strides, he crossed the distance that separated him and jumped on the fox's muzzle, sinking his face into the soft fur, and squeezing it as if his life were in it. "I thought I'd never see you again." Kurama snorted in some annoyance, but did nothing to push the sticky human away from his person. Over the past year, he had become accustomed to the little blonde's affection. To live in a world devastated by war, among only a handful of survivors, and with only one alive, it would have made even the coldest individual look for any kind of friendly company. It turned out that Naruto didn't have to look very hard. He was carrying her in his guts. A muffled and cautious voice woke Kurama from his meditations. "What happened?" "To tell the truth, I'm not sure," the big fox replied, watching his human intently. "Still," he added. Her crimson eyes narrowed slightly at the slight tension in the boy's shoulders. "The others?" Naruto asked quietly. "Dad, Kakashi, and Greek." He raised his head suddenly to look at his friend. Her blue eyes, once bright, were now filled with horror and fear, which stood out in her pale and ghostly complexion. "I can't stand by and do nothing, I have to help them." The teenager stood up. He felt only a small fraction of the pain as his real body. Now controlled by Kurama, he endured, but even that made Naruto shudder at the slightest movement. "Madara, Obito, Jubi, and Greek." She babbled non-stop, panic-stricken, as she slipped off the fox's snout and almost fell face-first into the water. When her knees threatened to buckle. "They can't, Dad and Sensei, Sasuke is they." "Don't worry," Naruto was reassured by Kurama. He wrapped one of his tails around the terrified boy and pulled him to himself. They're not here. Your body is a mess and you need to heal. You should stay here until I think it's over. It doesn't hurt enough for your fragile human mind. But they are not here, the beast repeated patiently. There is no one around us. Naruto ceased his feeble struggling and stood there in silence for a while. So, where are they? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper, choppy and full of pain. Kurama's gaze softened. I don't know, he confessed. Something happened when Jubi's Vijudama collided with us. We were thrown somewhere else. The Hinchuriki blinked in surprise, turning his head to look to his friend in the eyes with a slight frown. Thrown to another place. I lost connection with you for a while after the collision, so I'm not completely sure what exactly happened, the Kyumi explained. But you and I survived somehow. We're safe for now. The involvement of you and me did not go unnoticed by Naruto. He closed his eyes and took a shaky breath. A tear slid down her cheek, but she did nothing to hide it. Rest, Naruto, Kurama urged him gently. And then we'll figure it out together. Thank you, Kurama, the teenager murmured. The fingers of his hand closed over the fox's handful of hair, holding it to his probably last friend. And he sank into an uneasy sleep. Naruto woke up to a world of aches and pains running through his body, although it was nothing compared with the agony from which Kurama had saved him. Groaning, the Hinchuriki carefully rolled from his back to face down, so that he could start the arduous effort of getting up from the surface where he lay. His muscles were shaking from the tension as he used his arms to propel himself. Even before Naruto opened his eyes, an approaching buzzing sound suddenly caused him deep alarm. The blond man barely had the serenity to process it when he was already moving, his body acting out of pure instinct, engraved on him during the war. He jumped back, gritting his teeth so as not to scream as intense pain shot through his still numerous wounds. There was not enough time, the wounds were too serious, and Kurama was still too exhausted to heal them completely. There was a sudden movement of air, a flash of yellow hair, and a person appeared in front of Naruto. A rapid whirling sound reached his ears, but he completely ignored it as he fixed his gaze on the man. Happiness flooded him. Dad, the teenager exhaled with a slight smile, all his relief concentrated on that word. Those familiar bright cerulean eyes opened, and a deep surprise. He crossed the older blond man's face. Careful? Naruto's irises glowed red as the Kyuubi forcefully took control for a brief instant, pulling his human's body away from danger. A Rasengan scattered into nothingness, and the attacker jumped back, creating a greater distance between them, to be next to his two companions. Naruto groaned as he fell to the ground, sitting up with his arm around his aching ribs. Damn it, Kurama, he cursed under his breath. Humans aren't supposed to move like that when they're so hurt. A growl came from the depths of his mind. Look more carefully, Naruto, the big fox urged. What do you mean? The confused Hinchuriki asked as he raised his head and quickly observed the three men on the other side of the clearing, formed up after their crash into the forest floor. It's just Dad, Kakashi-sensei, and the words stuck in his throat when what he was seeing finally caught up with him. Naruto had no doubt that the first man was Minato Namikaze. He saw the same bright yellow mane and the same eyes every time he looked at himself, being an exact copy of his father. Esirama teased them non-stop during his one-year game of hide-and-seek with the Ucha, especially after the teenager grew his hair on both sides of his face. But the blue eyes, usually warm and affectionate, now cast a look that froze Naruto's flesh, bones and soul. And he felt as if he was Desmo in the middle of a hailstorm, where every piece of ice was a frosted dagger sticking into his skin. His father looked older. The teenager noticed some wrinkles around his eyes, which had nothing to do with a severe expression on his face, and he was tired. More tired than ever. The black sclera had disappeared, which meant that the man was really alive, not just resuscitated with a resuscitation jutsu. Kakashi, standing to Minato's left, looked almost the same, with her spiky, gravity-defying silver hair. and mask firmly on, covering the lower part of her face. The man was alert, ready to spring into action at any moment, as his two dark gray eyes scanned the clearing. Before finally settling on the dazed Naruto, giving him a sharp and scrutinizing look. There was no vertical scar over his left eye, no Sharingan spinning in that socket, not even his frontal shield tilted over him. But it was the shinobi who was positioned to the right of the yondaime who made Naruto's hair stand up on the back of his neck, and his muscle tighten as soon as his eyes met. The two red ones with 3 tomes revolving around their pupils. Obito Uchiha. I would never forget the person who plunged the world into madness and chaos, who unleashed the raging hell to devour forests and wildlife, and cover the sky with its smoke, who massacred his friends and allies, who tainted the life of the blonde young man from San. Blood, sorrow and pain. However, now Obito was not conveying the same malice as the last time Naruto had seen him. He also had no scars on his face, which was extremely strange. A lot of things in this picture were wrong, but this particular Uchiha, standing next to his father and his sensei, was overcoming everything. Maybe not, because there was one more detail that made Naruto question his grip on reality. The 3 men had been wearing shinobi on their heads for the past day. Each one represented a leaf with a swirl inside, which showed their loyalty to Konohagakure. And the 3 symbols of Konoha featured deep and dazzling cuts. Falling in reverse, not quite knowing what to do, Naruto stared at the 3 people who looked familiar to him, but at the same time so different. There was no way, and there was no way that his father was really alive. That Kakashi had both eyes intact, that Obito was apparently considered a comrade by those 2. Or that the 3 of them were the renegade ninjas of Konoha. It made no sense at all, and was completely impossible. React, boy. Kurama roared in his mind. Stop losing control in the face of possible enemies. But, and Kurama, that's it and I know it. I see it with my own eyes, the fox replied with a grunt. Now, concentrate. And Naruto concentrated. When he calmed down and his mind reactivated, he felt a surge of anger. They certainly couldn't be his father or his sensei. They would not stand by that despicable Uchiha. How dare they pretend to be them? The Jinchuriki stood up, his anger pushing the pain away, and answered the gaze of those cold blue eyes with his own. Who the hell are you? He demanded. You don't think you're imitating Yondaime and Kakashi? They would never allow that particular Uchiha to approach them. Kakashi shot a fleeting glance at Obito, who frowned at his words. Minato narrowed his eyes, but didn't take them away from the teenager. You seem to know who we are, he said in a calm, measured tone, but with a hint of firmness. But you have us at a disadvantage, since we don't know who you are. Naruto couldn't help but feel the pain on his face when he heard those words. No. More than asking, he murmured. I was so confused. If they were imposters sent to deceive him, they wouldn't say they don't know him, would they? Nothing made sense the moment he woke up. Perhaps Uchiha had subjected him to a genjutsu. It seemed that Kurama thought the same, but then the young ninja felt a disturbing chakra discharge coming from the fox. However, nothing changed. Your name, ninja, ordered the yondaime. His gentle tenor contained a surprising amount of authority. The Jinchuriki frowned. You should know that. You named me myself. He wanted to scream, but instead, what came out of his mouth was a silent Naruto Uzumaki. If possible, his father's gaze became even colder and his fists, already closed, tightened even more. Is this a joke? He asked in a dangerous voice. A low mind that alarmed Naruto. Does that man really believe this? Minato pointed at the blond young man with his hand. It will make me think that. He abruptly interrupted himself and closed his eyes, taking a deep breath and pulling himself together. What man? Naruto exclaimed, even more puzzled, his mind full of possibilities. Madara, Kabuto, Obito looked at Uchiha. What are you talking about? Enough of this farce. When Namikaze looked at the teenager again, his face remained completely impassive, except for a burning fury burning deep inside of his piercing blue eyes. I won't take it anymore. The Jinchuriki's eyes widened as he suddenly saw a 3-pointed crib and familiar flying towards him. with a speed he could barely match in his current state. Besides, he was unarmed. His entire ninja arsenal had been used in a previous fight against the Ukiyas and the Humi. He didn't have a single shuriken left. He managed to dodge the Kuna and to the side. Naruto and Minato trained a lot during that year, so the young Uzumaki knew his father's fighting style like the back of his hand. He knew that the older man would appear right behind him with a sword in his hand or the already formed Rasengan, but he also understood that there would be no way he could dodge that attack in time. So Naruto, instinctively, looked for the second active beacon that he felt nearby, and teleported several steps towards the first kunai, who was immune, stuck in the place where he had been before. His use of Irasen seemed to take the three hostile ninjas by surprise, because Naruto gained a few seconds to grab the Kuna and disable the seal formula on its handle so that Minato couldn't use it, before suddenly the world around him was spinning. And it will turn. A confused K came out of the teenager's mouth when a burst of QB chakra interrupted the flow in his coils, and everything instantly returned to normal. Kakashi lunged at him, the edge of his sword glinting against the sun as it descended towards his body. Naruto raised his newly acquired weapon just in time to stop the attack, but he had no strength in his arms and was forced to retreat. The coordinated movement to his left and right caused Naruto to panic. Kurama! He mentally screamed and instantly felt a surge of chakra from his partner. The yellow shroud of the nine-tailed fox came to life, taking the form of a complete Ori. With one last longing glance at his father, Naruto disappeared in a yellow flash, moving too fast for the human eye to perceive. The Hinchiriki landed in a tree quite far from the crash site. When Kurama's mode disappeared, he felt completely exhausted, but there was no time to rest. Naruto had to flee before Minato's team could catch up with him. I could take the much-needed rest once I was at a safe distance from them. The young ninja advanced among the trees in silence when the Kyuubi spoke. Naruto, what the hell is this? He was interrupted by the teenager. That's definitely not the infinite Tsukuyomi. Create the perfect world, and in my perfect world, my dad and my sensei don't try to kill me. Kurama did not answer. As confused as his human friend was, he honestly didn't know what was going on. He had the nagging feeling that he had heard something similar, but the answer was still out of reach. The Kirib needed time to think, and the little one needed time to heal. Child, you need to rest, the fox said sharply. There was no reaction from the blonde, so he snorted and tried again. Naruto and... Fine. He blurted out the Hinchiriki, but then sighed. Sorry, you can. Of course. Naruto quickly made the series of hand seals, stopping at the most used one. The crossed seal. The Kyuubi chakra accumulated before disappearing in a large cloud of smoke. At the same instant, the teenager landed on a tree branch and suddenly staggered. His knees finally couldn't hold their own weight. He slipped and fell on his head, but instead of solid ground, his body fell on a soft pile of hair. Kurama's horse-sized copy landed gracefully on the ground with its human protected under its tail. The fox looked around and, seeing nothing threatening, lay down under the same tree. Are you okay, Naruto? He asked, looking at the boy hidden under the fur. The teenager muttered something incoherent, snuggling even closer. Have I ever told you how much I love your tails? He asked quietly after a minute. What? The big fox scoffed. Keep your little compliments to yourself, Brad. Naruto smiled, already half asleep. He didn't need to see his friend to know that he had a complacent smile on his lips, even though he considered his words an insignificant compliment. He's gone, Huto reported, while his active Sharingan was still wandering among the rows of trees, looking for some sign of the unknown ninja. That was strange, Kakashi said, slipping his katana into its sheath on his back. Minato turned around without saying a word, walked quickly to the nearest tree, and punched him. The poor animal shuddered, its trunk creaked painfully, but it resisted. The blonde leaned his forearm against the bark and forehead. Kakashi and Obito watched their sensei, but did not comment on his sudden fit of anger. They both looked at the clearing. It's really strange, The raven nodded. He looked like he was taken out of a very hard battle, but I don't see any signs of combat here. Kakashi nodded with a murmur, bending down to inspect the center of what appeared to be a crater of someone crashing to the ground. He looked up at the sky, but he didn't see anything out of place. It looks like it fell from the sky, he supposed. Maybe an air battle. So, the guy is wearing a forehead protector with the word ninja written on it. He can use Irasen. His eyes turn red. He's practically immune to genjutsu. He's enveloped in some kind of yellow chakra flames, and he moves so fast that even the Sharingan does not perceive it. He calls you. He pointed to Kakashi. His sensei fell from the sky, and he, Obito, paused, looking at Minato, who was motionless, and then shook his head. Did I forget something? The other ninja smiled, closing his eyes in happiness. He doesn't like you either. The Uchiha wrinkled his face with his classic angry expression. Really, Kakashi? Really? And Kakashi let out a giggle. It was totally worth it. Anyway, the silver-haired Jounin said, executing a series of hand seals before hitting the ground with his palm. The lines of the summoning seal were spread by the impact, and, an instant later, a small figure appeared in a cloud of smoke. Hello? A brown pug greeted the ninjas. Pakken, can you find the smell of an unknown ninja in this place, and follow his trail? Sure, the dog replied, moving quickly around the area, sniffing. He seemed more and more confused, until finally he sat down at the place where the unknown disappeared and looked at the humans, puzzled. What is it? Why am I flying Anna? He interrupted himself abruptly, throwing a nervous glance at his blonde companion. I'm going back to the boy, he whispered so the man wouldn't hear him. Two Jounins exchanged a glance. Of all the physical senses, smell was the most difficult to fake, especially under the nose of a specialized ninquin. If someone was so meticulous with this deception, it portended big problems. Kakashi frowned. Are you sure? I'm sure my paws are soft and lovely, Pakken guaranteed, and then he turned to Obito and lifted one of his front paws, showing the pads. Do you want to touch her? No, exclaimed the Uchiha. And hey? Why are they bothering me? The pug shrugged his shoulders. It's your loss. He looked at his master again and continued. I can't keep track of the smell either. It ends right here. Kakashi sighed. Thank you, Pakken. No problem, the summoning dog replied, and quickly dissipated. No luck. Both ninjas turned to look at Minato, who approached them warily, scanning the surroundings with his dull blue eyes. Nothing, sensei, Kakashi replied. Whatever that chakra layer was, it blocked out all the smell. We lost him. The blonde man frowned. I have a feeling it wasn't the last time we saw that stranger, he said, fixing his hard gaze on Obito. Maybe it's a new plan to separate us. No way, snorted the crow. The Uchihas will always be loyal to you, sensei. Minato's gaze softened, but he did not smile. No one saw his smile in the events of that fateful day. I know, Obito, and I appreciate the support of your clan, he said gently. But that man never starts something without being sure. We must be cautious, he warned his students, and they both nodded. For now, we have a mission to continue. The unknown may or may not be part of what's killing our allies, and we desperately need to find out. We can't lose any more people. I will send one of my ravens to a rendezvous point to warn the Itachi and Rin teams about the unknown ninja, Obito informed. Already performing the summoning seal sequence. Fine. After that, we will move. Naruto woke up feeling rested. My body felt stiff, but the pain had finally disappeared. The Hinchiriki pushed Kurama's tails away and sat down, yawning and stretching, working all the contractures of his muscles. The Kirib observed the blond young man before asking, Are you feeling better? Yes. The teenager's stomach roared, demanding food, and Kurama chuckled. How long was I unconscious? Naruto asked, jumping to his feet and starting some easy exercises. The fox hummed. About 14 hours. The blonde froze as he stretched. Then he turned to glare at his friend. The fox was sitting up instead of lying down, and Naruto had to raise his head to be able to look at the Kumi clone's red eyes. "And you let me sleep for so long." "Of course," Kurama replied matter-of-factly. "We can't let you fall out of the trees. You have to be in your best shape if we want to solve this strange situation." Naruto frowned deeply. "What a strange situation. That's the way to say it when your father and sensei tried to kill you," he muttered before his stomach roared again. And he rubbed it to calm it down. "First, I need to eat and drink." He looked at his clothes and frowned even more. "And I need to wash up and change." Without thinking, Naruto sealed with his hands, and 10 clones emerged. "You too, find something to eat," he ordered the original from the clones on the left, and they waved. "The rest of you, get some water." One copy wrinkled his nose in disgust, then turned to his companions and announced, "Let's find a body of water big enough for our stinky boss to take a bath." "Yes," everyone else shouted, and then quickly dispersed, ignoring the indignant "Hey" from Naruto. Kurama was bursting out laughing. It was always hilarious to watch the blonde brat argue with his own shadow clones. It seemed that, after using them for so long and so often, they had acquired autonomy. Or maybe that was Naruto's way of dealing with everything that happened, his own method of staying sane. "Oh, shut up, you giant raccoon!" the Hinshiriki barked as he turned on his heels to walk in a random direction. This time it was Kurama's turn to sputter indignantly. "Hey! Hey!" he exclaimed, following the human. "Don't put me in the same bag as that big-mouthed asshole. When you stop acting like him." The fox ran past Naruto and accidentally slapped the latter in the face with one of its tails, causing the human to stumble. "Ha ha, how mature," the teenager grumbled, spitting out some loose strands of hair. Kurama gave him a mischievous smile over his shoulder. Suddenly, Naruto perked up, and his mustachioed face lit up with a smile. "Hey, they found some water. Come on." He jumped into the tree, followed by Kurama, and both of them ran towards the place where one of the shadow clones scattered. Soon they came to the end of the trees that opened onto a small lake. The air was warmer there, the sound of insects and the occasional splash of some fish were attractive. The water was calm, but it had a great variety of shades of blue. It reflected the bright blue sky in the center with a deep blue below, while near the shore it was pale blue, almost translucent. The ancient trees of the Land of Fire, which hugged the lake on all sides, were reflected on its surface, and, as they undulated, seemed to dance with a life of their own. It was so peaceful, as if nothing was wrong in the world. Naruto dedicated a satisfied smile to his nine-tailed friend. Then, she quickly took off her dirty clothes and, with a cry of joy, ran along the surface of the lake before jumping high and diving in. "What?" the Kyugi teased, but there was only affection in his tone. "You're still a kid." He let himself fall to the ground, resting his head on the palm of his hand, closing his eyes, and wagging his tail lazily to the sides while he thought. After the total destruction of the allied ninja forces, along with almost all of Naruto's loved ones, they learned of the presence of some stragglers. However, their lives were extinguished before their group could reach them. Naruto almost lost his mind. Only the joint effort of Minato and Kakashi managed to prevent it. Finally, having his father in his life was the boy's salvation, and he clung to him and Kakashi with all the tenacity he could muster. Kurama frowned and tapped the ground with his finger, irritated. That those two would attack the blonde brat so viciously was really disconcerting. The fox was sincerely happy that Naruto still had the strength to enjoy that brief moment of peace. After all the pain and grief he had endured, and also after the events of yesterday. Soon, the two Narutos who had been sent to look for food jumped out of the trees with a dead rabbit. They began to prepare the fire to cook the meat, while the rest of the clones surrounded their resting place in a protective circle, keeping watch. The original stayed in the lake for a few more minutes, wiping all the dirt and blood off his body and hair until he felt enough. Clean. "I have a theory," Kurama said slowly as the blonde finished his bath and returned to the shore. Naruto arched an eyebrow in a gesture of silent question, at the same time activating the storage seal. Tattooed on the inner side of his left forearm, and grabbing the scroll that emerged from the air. Yes, he asked when he saw that the fox did not give more details. The Kirubi tapped his finger again, and one of his eyes half opened to look at the human. Remember what I said about being thrown somewhere else? He asked, and Naruto nodded. I think all that power and energy colliding at the same point accidentally broke the veil of reality, and we fell through that crack. The Hinchuriki frowned, and at the same time detached the spare clothes from the scroll. Where did he fall? Alternate universe. Seeing the boy's confused look, Kurama lowered his arm and stared into his blue eyes. My father once told us about other dimensions. He said that at some point, for unknown reasons, reality split into several paths. Its fragments split up again and again, forming an infinity of universes. Parallels, each with a different detail. Then, Naruto ran Maya's t-shirt over his head. We have the universe that my dad died in after sealing you inside of me, and the one that didn't, but somehow ended up as a renegade ninja. Or where you were never born, or were born dead? Maybe there was no attack on your birthday, or maybe I'm a prisoner of another ninja village, and you contain a completely different Bijulu. The possibilities are endless. The teenager put on his black and burnt orange jacket, and reached for his forehead protector, which was lying on over the pile of dirty clothes, frowning at the sight of the stained fabric. And we fell into one of those alternative universes. That was more of a statement than a question, but Kurama confirmed it anyway. If my theory is correct, yes. He waited patiently while the teenager proceeded. He was processing the information, already ready for his next question. How do we get back? We can't. What? Why is that? So many things happened on the battlefield, so much chakra was wasted, that it is impossible to determine exactly what caused the rupture. The big fox kept his Hinchuriki's defiant gaze. The cause was probably the sum of all the elements, he said. Do you know how to recreate that particular moment? The Jurub-s Bijudama, Nidame's water shield, some Menyeku, the Rinnegan, my chakra. Okay. I got it. The young ninja admitted hurriedly. His shoulders sank in defeat as his sad gaze rested on the calm surface of the lake. Even if we could go back, do you really want to do it? Kurama asked quietly. You should realize that there is nothing and no one to return to anymore. Yes, whispered the blonde. A silence spread along the shore of the peaceful lake, while the Kyubi allowed the child to cry. It was the clone's calm voice that finally broke it. Boss, the food is ready. Naruto exhaled all the air from his lungs in one long exhale, wiping his eyes with his sleeve. All right, he slapped his cheeks and took a deep breath. And now what? He asked as he sat on the floor by the fire. He passed the shield in front of his clone and pointed towards the lake. Kurama hummed thoughtfully. We need to get acquainted with this new world. So, recognition, he said, and the teenager nodded with his teeth already sunk into the cooked rabbit. You should send a clone to each of the hidden villages to gather information about what is happening there. The Hinchuriki muttered something like well thought out. In the meantime, we should talk to the locals. Naruto's lips curled into a slight grimace as he put the stick with the half-eaten corpse of the rabbit back on fire. You mean Dad and Kakashi? And he struggled. A shadow crossed his eyes. I guess I can't call that man my father anymore. It depends on how you look at it. The teenager's eyes immediately looked up. The elder also told us that while it is possible to cross between these parallel universes that we are experiencing, right now, there is a rule that not even divine entities can break. The Kyubi began as he sat up and stared at the blonde young man. Identical substances from two different planes of reality cannot exist in the same universe. Naruto blinked, and his mind went blank. Kurama sighed. It means that Minato of our world and this Minato share the same essence, he explained. So, although Minato of this world is not the one who gave you life, he can still be considered your father. That's right, Naruto remained silent, frowning. It's a little confusing. The Kyuubi chuckled. A little was clearly an understatement. Indeed, he nodded with a smile before getting serious again. It also means that you and I didn't exist in this world until we fell into it. Either you're dead or you've never been born. And Joey paused. They may not exist, Beej, to begin with. Or you assimilated to the Jub, the blonde offered. Kurama's tails wagged, betraying the fox's discomfort. That's one possibility. Well, Naruto got up and shook out his pants. Let's go find those guys and ask them. Do not forget that there is a possibility that you are actually what your forehead protectors symbolize. The Hinchuriki rubbed his face warily as he said in a low voice, I hope not. He then scattered the lurking clones from afar and created 4 more, adding up to 6 in total. 5 of them were sent to the main ninja villages, Kanoya, Suna, Kiri and Waikumo, to perform reconnaissance tasks. And the last one was to follow the group until they reached some kind of known marker or a village to identify exactly where they were in the land of fire and then dissipate, sending that information back to the original. I wonder if I can access Sage Mode without the Toad's summoning contract, Naruto thought out loud after his copies left, as he strapped on the washed and dried face shield. It would be easier to find them. Natural energy remains all around us, regardless of your status as a contractor, Kurama lazily pointed out. However, it should manifest itself in another way. Suddenly, he yawned, stretching his limbs. I'm going back to the label. Sure, the Hinchuriki replied indifferently, getting comfortable in a meditative position and closing his eyes. A loud clicking sound was heard, created by the release of the Kyuubi clone, and then silence. Gradually, it was filled with the sounds of nature. The singing of birds, the rustling of leaves, the splashing of water, the occasional splash of a fish, the buzzing of insects. Naruto opened his eyes, feeling calm and refreshed. He had no problems gathering the natural energy for the wise mode, and did not notice any noticeable difference. He got up and walked to contemplate his reflection on the surface of the lake. Aha, Naruto growled, noting his appearance. Golden irises, but instead of horizontal pupils like those of a toad, she had torn pupils. As if under the influence of the Kumi chakra. The marks around his eyes were now a deep dark red, almost black, and with steeper angles. Why does it remind me of the marks around your eyes? Guruma Terrario? Without the blood contract, it takes shape according to the strongest aspect of the user's chakra. For the Shaddai, it was the limit of his lineage. For you, it's my chakra intertwined with yours. Naruto stared at himself for a few more seconds, and then looked up. Well, it works, and it doesn't feel any different. I told you so. The teenager rolled his eyes. All right, let's start from where we met yesterday, he said, and jumped into the tree. A few hours later, just after his clone dissipated, when notifying Naruto about his position to the southeast of the Land of Fire, he found a trace of Minato's team. It took almost half a day more to finally detect one of his chakra signatures. Naruto had no trouble recognizing Kakashi's presence. This one was almost identical to his sensei's, with only a few differences. The teenager repressed the growing feeling of longing, concentrating on the present. And as he did so, he noticed an irregular fluctuation in Kakashi's chakra. As if he was seriously injured, which made him unconsciously speed up the pace. When his heightened senses detected an entity following his sensei's counterpart, his blood ran cold. A cruel and hateful growl echoed in his mind, the Kyuubi's bloodlust instantly soared through the ceiling, threatening to explode from the inside of the seal in the stomach of his Hinchuriki. Naruto's lips contracted into a grimace, revealing his long canines, and his sage yellow eyes turned a deep bright crimson, burning with barely contained rage. They are, yes, he exclaimed angrily. The golden flames of the Kyuubi chakra enveloped his body, and he disappeared from sight. Falling in reverse, Kakashi was jumping from tree to tree, and urgently, alarmed and keeping all his senses open. They had no idea. No one expected the betrayal of the person they had the honor of calling a friend. Despite all their paranoia and caution, they fell into an ambush. Only their skills, honed over years of training and adversity, saved their lives. Kakashi gritted his teeth. It wasn't the first time they had been stabbed in the back. They should have suspected it. At least consider the possibility. The betrayal hurt. It was impossible to get used to that painful emptiness after seeing your ally betray you. The Jounin didn't even want to think about how Minato was feeling at that moment. His sensei had been through enough shit to fill several lifetimes. Damn, he muttered, quickly taking in his surroundings as he flew. Where are you two? His team was separated by enemies after the initial explosion, and more than an hour had passed while Kakashi was looking for me. And Obito without success. Suddenly, the ninja noticed a brief movement in his peripheral vision. He immediately propelled chakra to his feet and catapulted from the tree branch as soon as he stepped on it. Landing gently on the forest floor, already spinning on his heels, with his hand outstretched to draw his katana. Relax, Kakashi, it's me. The silver-haired man stopped with the sword half-drawn and pointed at the figure in the tree. Obito, he exhaled, relaxing his tense muscles and letting the sword return to its scabbard. What? Little Bakakashi was worried about me, the other ninja joked with a mocking smile as he touched the ground next to his partner. As if Kakashi teased, making Obito pout. Have you seen Sensei? That question erased any joy present on the Raven's face. No, he shook his head. Do you have the Kot and the Sensei? I lost mine in an ambush. Yes, Kakashi replied, turning quickly and squinting at the sight of the bush. But it was just a breeze that rocked the leaves. He pulled the crib and three-pronged out of his bag and stared at the seal on the handle. I activated the formula and raisin, but what the fuck, the words got stuck in his throat. When the feeling of a sword digging into the small of his back caused his mind to stop abruptly. He looked over his shoulder, meeting his friend's eyes, which were watching him with the Sharingan, and then disappeared in a cloud of smoke. Obito grunted in frustration when a log fell into Kakashi's place. He looked at the gun in his hand, and his lips stretched into a macabre parody of a smile. There was blood on the blade, so his fellow ninja didn't come out completely unscathed before performing a replacement jutsu. When the fallen Kuna and raisin on the grass caught his attention, Obito's smile widened even more. The Uchiha expanded his senses and soon picked up the chakra signal of his silver-haired companion. A spark of excitement ran through his entire body. This would be an exciting hunt. Kakashi tried not to think about it, really. It turned out to be an impossible feat when he felt the blood gushing from the wound. The wound his best friend caused by stabbing him in the back. Literally and figuratively. Kakashi felt nauseous. It was as if the whole world was suddenly spinning too fast for him to comprehend, but he stayed still. He felt dizzy and, at the same time, numb. Fear was twisting his stomach. Had Ab really betrayed them? Kakashi, Minato-sensei, and everyone else. It was even possible. And what about Rin and Kazuki? Yes, and that was a strong yes, Obito was a traitor, did you know that? The pain and heaviness in his muscles were growing with each passing moment, but Kakashi ignored it as he ran through the forest. Maybe it was the unknown ninja's fault. Maybe he used some weird jutsu to manipulate Lucia's mind. The boy didn't seem to like it very much. And if he tried to convince them that he was a bad person, this could be that man's plan to divide them, as Minato had guessed. Kakashi needed to find his sensei. The ninja grimaced as vertigo momentarily overwhelmed him with his movements. It seemed that the Kunai had not reached any vital point, but the wound was still bleeding profusely, and had to be examined if she did not want to bleed out. Suddenly, Kakashi jumped up, and several shurikens embedded themselves in the place he occupied on the branch of the tree. He turned quickly with a koten in his hand and was paralyzed when he saw his assailant. Minato Namikaze. His sense and something like the father. There was no doubt who he was. A unique hair color and the warm and general, really quiet, chakra signature gave him away. But why was he attacking? I could clearly see that it was Kakashi. It took the silver-haired man only a moment to snap out of his stupor. His survival instincts kicked in with full force. But the blonde was already right in front of him, his own sword, going straight for his student's throat. Kakashi's hand was only halfway to block the attack, and when, without warning, Minato crashed to the ground, as someone descended on him as the embodiment of heavenly wrath. The yellow chakra shroud, shaped like an Aori, lit up after him. His demonic red eyes with torn pupils glowed with fury, and his lips contracted into a fierce grimace. As a squeaky white Rasengan sank into the flesh of its victim, burying her further into the earth, killing her in the act. The unknown ninja raised his head, and Kakashi involuntarily shuddered upon encountering those blood-red irises. A kind of chakra claw emerged from the teenager's shoulder and shot towards him. He managed to take a step back before it caught on his vest and pushed him to the side. Naruto flew past him, with another wind-induced chakra ball forming in his palm. Kakashi turned around just in time to see Obito following his sensei's fate. He crashed into the tree with inhuman force, and the advanced version of the Rasengan tore his guts apart with ease. The tree cracked under the pressure and collapsed, with splintered wood fragments flying everywhere. The Jounin didn't even know what to feel or think. It all happened so fast, in an instant, that his mind was forced to look for a reaction. The blood loss didn't help. But before Kakashi could pull himself together, the blonde ninja hissed in disgust and jumped backwards from his best friend's corpse. I was supposed to be the deceased. Before his eyes, the skin began to melt, and pieces of it detached from the motionless body, until revealing only a white human-shaped figure with pale green hair. I hate these things, Naruto exclaimed, shaking the arm that a moment ago was inside that thing. Damn tree, and muttered, inspecting his hand with a frown. I know they're not, and hey. Kakashi's eyes widened as he processed what he was seeing, and he observed his sensei's body. A white, unrecognizable corpse was the only thing lying there. The feeling that these two were not Minato and Obito was encouraging. Happiness invaded him instantly. Are you okay? The man's gaze suddenly fell on the stranger, and he let out a silent sigh of relief. The boy's eyes had returned to normal. Well, as normal as they could be while a visible chakra mantle surrounded them. Kakashi watched as the boy's expression transformed into genuine concern, with a tinge of something else he couldn't identify. This ninja was an enigma. A very powerful enigma. Kakashi doubted that he could handle him alone, not with the brute strength and speed that the teenager had just demonstrated. It seemed that he was also completely recovered from the battle he had participated in the previous day. So a quick regeneration could be added to his growing list of abilities. Naruto was obviously getting more nervous when Kakashi didn't answer him directly. Maybe he should. He was about to get closer when he suddenly stopped and looked to the side. Daddy's coming, he said, but then he frowned and added with much more bitterness. I mean, Minato's coming. What? To where? Kakashi blinked. Were you referring to him? However, the young ninja wasn't even looking at him. Now he was looking in the opposite direction with a frown. I can't believe we're going for that Uchiha, Naruto muttered after a moment, as he turned to leave. I'm moving, I'm fending you off. Don't worry. When Naruto jumped into the tree, a clicking sound was heard, and Kakashi found himself looking at the exact replica of the boy. Without the chakra veil. Without all the dirt and blood completely covering him. He looked an awful lot like the grown-up version of the scandalous little blonde Namikaze, whiskers and all. Too much. His heart was aching. Do you need help? The clone asked, still keeping his distance from the injured Jounin so as not to look threatening. No, Kakashi replied dryly, finally leaving the crib and still clutching it in the palm of his hand, but keeping an eye out for the possible enemy. However, he realized that if the young blonde man had wanted to harm him, he would have done it already while the original was still there. In fact, it seemed that I owed him my life. Naruto frowned, but said nothing, and decided to wait quietly for his counterpart's father. Kakashi's calm voice startled him. Thank you. The teenager's lips curved into a soft smile, and his gaze softened. I'm glad. If I had arrived on time, he said before his expression turned sad. Many have been lost because I arrived too late. That smile, the tender look in those cerulean eyes, the sadness mixed with guilt, the chakra so warm. Free and fast, like the spring wind, playful but capable of turning deadly in an instant. The resemblance to Minato deeply shocked Kakashi. He gaped at him, stunned. He couldn't be the real Naruto, could he? Minato landed in front of Kakashi, adopting a defensive position. He smelled blood, which added to his growing concern. The blond man took a quick glance over his shoulder. His student was sitting on the floor with his first aid kit next to him, but he did not look mortally wounded. Letting the tension leave his shoulders, Minato stared at the creature who called himself Naruto. "Don't bother attacking, I'm just a shadow clone, I fence you," the teenager said. His voice was heavy with irritation, as his blue eyes watched the older man with great intensity. Dad, look what I can do. Shadow clone jutsu." "That wasn't supposed to happen, I'll fence you off." Unbeknownst to anyone, memories rushed to his mind, and Minato bit the inside of his cheek, squinting at the supposed Naruto. It was not the time to wallow in his grief, pain and guilt, if there was a good time for it. So he hid it in the depths of his mind, and looked at Kakashi again. The silver-haired ninja nodded, confirming the stranger's words. "I have a message from the boss," the clone said. "He wants to talk to you, and he will be waiting for you with your third member." He pointed out where the original Naruto was headed. "Talk about we have a theory," he replied before simply disappearing without further explanation. Minato did not go unnoticed the plural, and his mind was filled with possibilities. Were you referring to the original user and his clones, or maybe there was someone else with the imposter? Taking a breath, he turned around and immediately bent down. "Where? Let me see." His student didn't complain and pulled up his shirt, exposing the patched wound on his back. Minato frowned, inspecting the quick patch. "How?" It was another cutting question. It was. Kakashi did not interrupt his sensei. "To be honest, the guy saved my life." He sighed. "These white things looked and felt exactly like you and Obito, and he knew what they were. He intercepted them before they could kill me." Minato raised an eyebrow, and his gaze went towards the strange and unknown white bodies. "He is very powerful," the silver-haired Jounin said slowly. "His speed and power are incredible. And you can also use the Rasengan, the advanced version to be precise, combined with the wind chakra. Quite easily, apparently." The older man's head fell back, with an expression of surprise and disbelief stamped on his face. While the first version of the Rasengan was pure chakra manipulation at its finest and therefore possible to copy, the higher level one, combined with the element of nature, was something completely different. Many tried, but as far as Minato knew, he was the only one who could do it, without the Rasengan exploding in his face. And yet, it still looked like an unfinished jutsu. "Sensei," Kakashi called softly, "I think we should talk to the boy." "Could it be one?" "No." The single word uttered interrupted any comment from the young ninja. Years had passed, but Minato was still suffering deeply from the tragedy that struck his life. The wound from the loss was still open and bleeding. "No, Kakashi," the older man repeated, in a firm, authoritative voice. "We both know it's impossible, and I won't fool myself into thinking I can get my son back. I buried them, both of them, with my own hands. They're gone now. Now," he said sternly, getting to his feet, "we have to look for Obito. Are you well enough to move in?" Kakashi sighed. Of course he knew that, but somehow his instincts told him otherwise, and if he had learned anything during his time as a ninja, it was that an intelligent ninja should always listen to his instinct. For now, he decided not to confront his sensei. There were still many missing pieces in the puzzle of Naruto Uzumaki. "Yes, I'll manage," Kakashi replied, getting up. "Come on." Naruto stared at one of the dead white Setsus, anger still burning under his skin. He hated those creatures with a passion. It was not difficult to deal with them. Kurama's ability to perceive negative emotions was invaluable in eliminating the clones, and they were quite a lot. Quite weak, but the young Hinchiriki despised his ability to transform into anyone with such perfection. Making friends and allies doubt each other, thinking that your loved one had betrayed you, was the worst act in Naruto's life. How peculiar. Naruto spun, and the kunai he had taken from Minato slid smoothly from his sleeve to his palm. He found the possible enemy in an instant and blinked in surprise. It was Tobi. She was wearing a simple black cape with purple lining and a very similar orange mask with a spiral pattern around her right eye, but also had a hole for the second eye. Naruto's gaze fell on Obito, motionless, who was lying next to Tobi's left foot. "How is that possible?" he asked out loud, not addressing anyone in particular. "That's a good question, no doubt," the man answered in a voice. Masquerade, and although his voice was different, it still made Naruto's hair stand on end. "You," he pointed to the teenager, "should no longer exist, but here you are." The Hinchiriki frowned, but said nothing. He simply stood there, serene and attentive, watching the new enemy. Tobi cocked his head slightly as if trying to solve a riddle. "An anomaly," he calmly asserted. "Unfortunately, not so important in the big picture. He probably didn't see us working together, and therefore he doesn't know about me yet," Kurama pointed out with a dial tone of fun. A malicious and arrogant smile was drawn at the corner of Naruto's lips. "We'll see, won't we?" he asked. The man stared at him. "No matter what you want to do, you are incapable of changing this great plan that is already underway," he said dismissively, as he turned to look at Lucia. "Now I will claim what I came for." Tobi tried to grab Obito, but before he could hold him, Obito's eyes snapped open, revealing two spinning Sharingan. The crow threw a cradle and against the outstretched hand of the enemy, then rolled and stood. Standing up with a jump, confusion was drawn on his face as he staggered unexpectedly, and his gyujutsu faded away. Unable to stand, Uchiha knelt down, trying to maintain his defense, but it was evident that something was very wrong with him. Tobi looked at his hand. Ignoring the superficial cut, he reached for Obito again. At that moment, Naruto's shadow clone appeared among them, with a wind Rasengan forming on his palm. The masked man jumped back to avoid being hit, and walked away with a shunsin, as hundreds of tiny wind blades shattered the place he had just occupied, not even sparing a nearby tree, and causing a large cloud of debris to rise into the sky. Naruto freed the cradle and from his teeth, where he had temporarily held it to make hand seals for a wind jutsu, and grabbed it in the air. His fixed and concentrated gaze did not turn away from a figure dressed in black, now high up in a tree. "No wonder you took care of my companions. It sounds like you might be worthy of playing with," Tobi declared, though his voice was still emotionless and muffled, as at first. "But the cavalry will be here soon, so he snuck me out. Until we meet again." With one last glance at Lucia, he disappeared. "This is annoying," Kurama said thoughtfully after a few minutes, when they were sure Tobi had really left. "How can Tobi exist? I'll tell you," Naruto shouted in frustration. When he pointed his finger at Obito, surprised is here. "Calm down, brat," the Kyumi shouted angrily. The blonde stood still, then exhaled and ran a hand through his hair. "Is this so confusing? It's obvious that the masked man's identity is different here," the big fox mused once he felt the boy relax. Naruto frowned. "Pain and the rest of Akatsuki might be around too," he muttered. "But I still think we should go." "No, Naruto. We've already talked about it," Kurama interjected. "You have to think about the consequences. This is not our world, and we still know almost nothing about it." After a moment, he added with a grunt, "I can't believe I'm stopping you from killing an Uchi." The corner of Naruto's mouth twisted at the irony his tailed friend had just pointed out. But he quickly hesitated when his gaze fell back on Obito. "You possess my ability now," the Kyumi repeated. "Can you perceive anything evil in this human?" The teenager stared at Lucia long and hard. "No," he finally admitted reluctantly. "Do you remember the presence of Obito Uchiha from our own dimension?" A low growl that escaped from Naruto's throat was the only response Kurama needed to know that the brat understood the message he was trying to convey. Despite being a ninja and host of the greatest of the Vihuru, Naruto never felt real hatred towards anyone, or wanted to kill anyone in cold blood. Obito Uchiha had to destroy the world to awaken both emotions in him. For the young Uzumaki, there was no middle ground. He loved or hated with every fiber of his being. Kurama understood the concerns of his Hinchiriki, but with so many uncertainties. He did not want to miss the opportunity to get allies in this new world, allowing the boy no, both succumb to his bloodlust. Someone had to stop the little blonde idiot from doing something stupid, and he certainly wasn't himself. Naruto glared at the man with his arms crossed in front of his chest, but he didn't move or show any other signs of wanting to attack him. Keeping a safe distance from him, Obito put his hands in a discreet position, and was about to say something when Minato and Kakashi fell right next to him. He opened his eyes wide and rushed to get up, but vertigo hit him hard. And he would have crashed into the dust if not for Kakashi grabbing him just in time. "Don't worry, Obito, it's just us. Are you hurt?" the silver-haired ninja asked as he examined his friend's body for any visible injuries. The Raven looked at him with narrowed eyes, stunned. "You guys are the real ones, right?" Kakashi's gaze wandered to some white debris scattered around the place, and an understanding crossed his face. "Yes," he assured with a smile, instinctively closing his eyes so the other man could see. "I was also attacked by these things that looked exactly like you and Sensei." Obito frowned, fixing his clouded gaze on his companion. "Are you okay?" "More than you. What happened?" "You, I mean the one who seemed to have injected me with something. It is difficult for me to control the chakra or even to avoid falling asleep." Minato interrupted his staring battle with Naruto and looked at his student. "It seems like a strong tranquilizer, but we should let Rin examine them as soon as possible." His gaze went to one of the white corpses. With a frown, he silently asked himself, "What exactly are they?" "White Zetsu." Naruto's voice attracted the attention of the three ninjas. "At least, that's what we call them where I come from," the young blonde explained. "Zetsu can alter his form and chakra signature, creating a complete copy of someone else, and replicating his abilities to some extent." He stared at one of those things. A perfect tool to turn allies against each other. Minato's eyes narrowed into slits of a stormy blue, shining with suspicion. "And how do we know you're not one of them?" "My companion," Naruto said earnestly and without batting an eyelid. "It is impossible to imitate him." His words seemed to alert Minato's team. "And where's your partner?" the older blonde asked cautiously. "It's better to show them to them instead of just explaining them," Kurama suggested. His voice was a pleased purr rather than his usual deep baritone. Naruto's lips stretched into a mischievous smile as he quickly ran through the familiar sequence of hand seals. Minato, Kakashi, and Obito adopted a defensive posture with their cribs and ready, prepared for any attack by the unknown ninja. However, they could never have been prepared for what he actually did. A huge cloud of smoke appeared next to Naruto, and instantly the three were flooded by an inhumanly evil and disgusting bloodlust that stiffened their bodies against their wool and made their hair stand on end. A powerful presence began to settle over them, a force that threatened to overwhelm their minds with just its weight. A bunch of tails emerged from the cloud, spreading out after the orange figure of the fox-like creature, broad and predatory. The demonic eyes, red as blood, burst open and immobilized them with cold efficiency. Kurama raised his head and flashed a malicious smile, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth on all her splendor, as she spoke in a low, slow voice. "Greetings, humans." Falling in reverse. "Greetings, humans." Three ninjas gasped at the sight of the Kyuubi. His small size did not diminish his presence. It was still unfathomably powerful and brutally overwhelming all their senses, stifling their will to fight, and racing their hearts with a growing fear. None of them would ever forget this terrifying pure chakra entity, the creature that amounted to a natural disaster, the beast that could supposedly cause tsunamis and flatten mountains. With a single wag of his tail, the entity that ravaged their village 8 years ago, and marked the end of their old lives and the beginning of a nightmare. Naruto's impostor was right. There was no way anyone could imitate the toxic chakra and that vastness of the strongest Vihulu. They definitely weren't ready. They were absolutely unprepared to fight the Cuban and his companion. Kakashi was injured, and Obito was hanging from his shoulder like jellies and bones. Minato needed to get his two students out of there as soon as the opportunity presented itself. I had already lost enough, I was not going to lose any more loved ones. The blonde clenched his trembling hands into fists, his knuckles turned white, his icy gaze met the fox's crimson gaze. His firm resolve pushing any trace of fear and uncertainty out of the way. Something in the Kyuubi's expression subtly changed, and his smile suddenly became much softer and friendlier. The malice of his chakra faded away until only soft and comforting chakra threads, overflowing with life force, remained. The same refreshing feeling they felt emanated from the teenager's chakra veil. Such a change left the three men bewildered, their minds racing, desperately trying to figure out what exactly was going on. Obito rubbed his eyes, wondering if what the enemies had injected had caused him to hallucinate. "That's the Kyuubi," he exhaled as he saw that the image of the smiling nine-tailed fox was not disappearing. "Do I see it right? Little Kyuubi." Naruto snorted, but managed to disguise the laughter with a timely cough. However, he couldn't quite wipe the amused smile off his face. The Kyuubi glared at Lucia, the edges of his snout crumpled in a ferocious growl. That would make any other ninja wet his pants with fear. The three veteran ninjas needed all their willpower to resist this new tsunami of bloodlust. Minato moved closer to his students, ready to grab them and teleport. Kakashi's gaze looked at him briefly, and his grip on the incapacitated death intensified, understanding the plan of his sense, and without need of words. However, he wanted to hit his best friend on the head. Seriously, he could at least try to restrain himself. Not Drogo, Obito was an asshole. "I do not like your insolence, Uchiha," the Bijulu said in a voice that did not hide his hatred. A deep growl rumbling at the bottom of his throat, while his tails wagged around him with a kind of ferocity. Regal. However, he made no move to attack. Minato took another small step closer to his teammates. Naruto's doppelganger looked at his supposed companion, his lips curled into a mocking smile, and commented lightly, "I can't believe you're still in a bad way. To humor because of the size of your clone." The Kyuubi's ear twitched. "I'm not sulking," he growled in a dangerously low voice, but that only provoked a laugh in the boy. One of the tails came up and hit the back of his head, gently. The young blonde man choked with laughter, waving his arms to keep his balance. "I'm not sulking," the fox repeated when Naruto looked at him with contempt. This vision was so amazing that even the former yondaime went blank for a moment. What? Damn it? Really? Since when has the Kyuubi been so weak and civilized? You're definitely in a bad mood. Everyone was transfixed by another brilliant death comment. The tense silence was broken by Naruto's new explosive laugh. The Kyuubi closed his eyes and took a deep breath, drawing the perfect picture of someone surrounded by idiots and meetings, having all your patience to deal with them. Minato could certainly identify with the fox at that precise moment. Seeing that the chakra monster did not attack, Kakashi relaxed a bit and gave in to his urge to hit his friend on the head, eliciting a scowl and a disgusted growl from, "What? This form is simply a product of the Shadow Clone's jutsu-derived technique, a special variation that Naruto and I created." The Kyuubi explained. "My real body resides inside the seal." The Hinshiriki, Minato commented quietly, his features hardened into a cold, distant mask. He mercilessly crushed the memory that was slipping from the depths of his mind to mock him. The memory of the 9-year-old boy lying in the rubble, unconscious and covered in his own blood, with a newly placed seal glowing on his stomach. Instead, he concentrated on the current situation, but honestly, the Kyuubi's behavior was so disconcerting that he couldn't help but want to stay and see what was going on. As if to prove him right, the fox sat up, his fluffy tails wrapped around his legs. His murderous face disappeared without a trace, replaced by a lazy indifference. "Don't be so alarmed, humans. I will not attack unless provoked, he said slowly, almost slurring his words, watching the trio with his eyes ajar. This blonde idiot, he pointed to Naruto with his head, insists to call me friend. Keep this in mind if they insist on hurting you. I won't allow it. Such an indirect way of expressing his affection made the teenager roll his eyes. I love you too, Kurama, she murmured. That the Kirubio Kurama, like the child, called the bug. Julu simply scoffed, but his expression could not hide how truly pleased he felt. Obito rubbed his eyes again. Kakashi was intensely debating whether or not he should try to use a genjutsu. Minato massaged his temple to try to chase away a headache and minin. Although his penetrating gaze did not turn away from the two figures in front of him. He was already approaching the limit of the absurdity that he could endure in a day. One of the Kyuubi's ears turned to the side, and soon his head followed the same direction, his crimson eyes suddenly sharp and alert. The previous laziness was nowhere to be seen. Naruto called with an urgent tone that overlapped his deep baritone. The teenager looked up at the fox, and then looked away to where he was looking. After an instant, his eyes opened briefly before narrowing again, becoming rigid. Cold and hard. Hurry up, Brad. The golden flames of the chakra veil were ignited even before the Vihulu finished his sentence. At that, Naruto was already on the move when he exclaimed, spinning on his heels, with his arm outstretched, and the chakra starting to accumulate in his palm. An expression of surprise and amazement took over Minato's face as he saw how the simple Rasengan in the boy's hand transformed into a kind of white chakra construction in a matter of seconds. Its shape was similar to that of a shuriken, and it emitted a high-pitched squeak, almost a white noise. The moment the boy finished spinning, he threw the chakra construction into the forest. It buzzed through the trees with great momentum and disappeared from sight in the blink of an eye. An instant later, there was a blinding flash, and a huge explosion shook the ground from that direction. A shockwave followed, sweeping through the ancient forest, followed by a cloud of dust. The blonde guy looked at his students to make sure they were okay. Obito was completely unconscious, snoring and drooling on Kakashi's shoulder, but otherwise seemed fine. The white-haired man had two fingers pressed on Lucia's neck. Feeling his sensei's gaze on him, he whispered, sleeping. Then he paused, casting a cautious glance at the two figures currently hidden by the dust. What did he attack? They were not answered by Minato, frowning. Maybe one of those white things again. The Kyuubi and his Hinshiriki were in the same place, both of their attention focused on something beyond their line of sight. Do you think we have it? Naruto asked, sharpening his senses to the maximum and finding nothing. He retired. For now, Kurama replied. If it had been so easy to kill him, your father and the Nigame would not have tried so hard to make the seal. And get rid of that disgusting thing. The young ninja made a face. Well, then that's a problem, he exhaled, letting the chakra mode go with him. The Kirub reflected in silence. I remember the stamp, and I'm sure I can draw it. At least most of it. He looked at the teenager. You humans will have to do the rest. It's way above my level, Kurama. Naruto exclaimed and raised his arms. You know I'm not very good with Furuinjutsu, I'll fence you. Yes, agreed the fox, looking at Minato. But we have your father affirm alternate universe. The mind of the action there was working me at 1,000 an hour. Alternate universe. I've heard that term before. The possibility of other dimensions was mentioned in the personal diary of the Nidame, along with the initial idea of the Irasen. The previous cage dismissed the research on that topic, focusing on jutsu, but there it was. Only a few sentences, but Minato could understand the concept. If other worlds really existed somewhere out there, who was to say that people couldn't cross over from one universe to another? But that would mean, and not imply, that he did not dare to let that speculation play out completely. Simply misinterpreting the words of the devil or being manipulated by him. If he let hope take root in his heart, and it turned out to be a lie, Minato wasn't sure he could survive the fall. What do you mean? The older blonde asked, stubbornly fixing his gaze solely on the Kyuubi. Kurama's vulpine eyes pierced through him, making his soul shudder from the intensity of that gaze. Slowly, a smile was drawn on the Viju's lips. "Don't play dumb, Minato," he said amused. "If you're half as smart as the Namikaze Minato we know, you've already tied the knot with that phrase." The blonde held his breath, his blue eyes unconsciously rested on the boy. He watched as Naruto frowned, his expression hardened, crossed his arms and hunched slightly, obviously defensively, as if he was prepared to repel the onslaught. "You're lying, Kyugi," Minato hissed, staring at the smiling fox. His accusation provoked a brief mocking laugh. "And why would I do that, human?" The Kyugi taunted, waving its 9 tails after him with barely contained aggression. "If it wasn't for Naruto, I wouldn't care about the survival of your pathetic humanity, let alone the 3 of you. Still, we had saved Kakashi and the Uchiha." Strange as it seemed, Minato believed him. Such a powerful and proud creature would not stoop to lying just to deceive a few humans. He had no doubt that the Kyubi was also the real one, even if his attitude left him perplexed. Considering all of this to be true, then that would mean, and his attention was inevitably drawn back to the boy next to the Kyubi. The guy with a familiar face, dotted with faint, familiar freckles on his nose and cheekbones, bright, familiar blue eyes. Painfully familiar mustache-like markings. No, he didn't look familiar, my natural noticed, he was the same. The same hair, the same eyes, the same features, the same manners. Everything was the same. Of course, this Naruto was older, more mature, and, consequently, different. He was no longer a child, but a young man, a capable ninja. He wasn't her Naruto, but technically he was still her son. Fine. Minato didn't quite know what to make of this epiphany. "Sensei?" Kakashi asked quietly. He was stunned when the older man looked at him, with an expression more lost than ever. "What's the matter?" The blonde opened his mouth to say something, but closed it without saying a word. He clenched his jaw. El Jounin decided to seek an explanation from the other side. "We were not among the residents of this world a day or 2 before this moment," Kurama said dryly. Naruto frowned at his friend and complained. "Now you're talking in riddles, I'll ball you." "Am I?" asked the fox with a sarcastic smile. It took Kakashi almost a minute to process all the information at a frantic pace, trying to discern what exactly the fox meant. When the possible conclusion arose in his mind, he opened his eyes a lot. "Did you come from another world?" "I rather crashed," the teenager grumbled, suppressing a grimace as he remembered the silent, heart-rending fall and the agonizing impact. "It wasn't by choice, I'll tell you. An accidental crossing. We were in the middle of the battle," the Kyubi clarified. "The last battle against our enemies that we lost. And at the last moment, all the attacks and defenses were concentrated on a single point," Kurama continued, ignoring the dejected comment of his Hinchiriki. "The clash of such huge amounts of chakras and others. Energies broke the barrier between the worlds. Naruto was right at the epicenter and fell through that crack." He paused, taking it all in. "This is my theory." Minato narrowed his eyes. A sudden surge of anger boiled up in the depths of his body, burning like lava. Why would Naruto be at the epicenter of such a devastating confrontation? What the hell was he, his version of that other world, doing to allow his son to be beaten? Not that I was in a position to preach on this particular topic. At least his counterpart kept his son safe for about 16 years. He was a much bigger failure as a father himself. "Can you come back?" the older blonde asked quietly. Naruto pursed his lips. "No." His eyes were dark and haunted. "Even if we could, there's no one left, no one." His voice was barely shaking, but it was enough for them to notice. The Kyubi lowered his head and whispered something to the boy. Naruto returned a shaky smile, and Minato was able to read his lips as he thanked him. The latter gave a small smile, while one of his tails swayed. He would calmly dart to perch on the floor or around the teenager's legs. The bond between this Naruto and his bike was really amazing. He would never have believed that such a friendship could exist if he had not seen it with his own eyes. Minato wondered if his Naruto would have managed to make friends with the big fox if he had been given the opportunity. "What are you planning to do now?" Kakashi broke the silence with a curious question. The teenager shrugged his shoulders. She stared at the white-haired man before touching her forehead and asking, "Why are they like this?" "Ah yes, it's probably a very strange sight for you," the Jounin admitted, with a smile that wrinkled his mask. "Dude, it's a long story." "Probably as much as because yours is so strange," Minato nodded, covering his eyes with his hand to get some rest. He felt as tired as he probably looked. "Tell me one thing, are you the bad guys?" The older blonde man's hand came down, and the sky blue met the same shade of blue. "No," he replied in a firm voice and sure of his veracity. Naruto was silent for a moment, watching the man's tired face, searching. "All right," he said quietly. He rubbed the back of his neck. "I can help you with your Zetsu problem." "Was it one of those Zetsu that you attacked earlier?" Naruto blinked when he saw Kakashi. That," he said as he understood what his sensei's counterpart was referring to. "No." "Well, yes. More or less. It was the one with the aloe vera." Kurama chuckled at the dumbfounded expressions of the two adults. "Aloe vera?" Kakashi repeated in disbelief. "Yes," snorted Naruto to confirm it. "Like it makes sense. That's a bastard, I'll **** you up." Suddenly, the Kyuubi looked towards the forest line behind the three rebels. Naruto warned. "I know," Kurama assured the teenager. "One of my Watcher clones dissipated a moment ago to inform me. I'll take care of it." Neither Minato nor Kakashi had time to react to his words before four men fell down next to them. Three Ukiyas, as indicated by a small Uchiwa embroidered on their outfits, and companions of the former Yondaime. Judging by the symbols of with, not stuck on their headbands. Naruto only recognized Itachi among them. The fourth was in civilian clothes, but moved with the grace and lightness of a child. The Bijulo bowed his head, and his mouth stretched into his former cruel and sharp smile, meeting the wide eyes of the newcomers. Stuck together. Minato-san greeted Itachi respectfully to his leader, and somehow managed to cram all the important questions into one breath. "There is no need to be alarmed." A copy of Naruto suddenly emerged from the forest and lunged straight at the civilian-looking ninja, arm ready to attack. The man only had time to turn around when the punch hit him in the stomach with the force of a small meteorite. The shadow clone was instantly scattered by the surrounding Ukiyas. The man's body flew out through the clearing, but before he could crash into the tree, another copy of the blonde young man descended on him with a wind Rasengan that tore his stomach and crashed him to the ground. Itachi threw a cradle, and the attacking enemy, who disappeared before he got close to him, while the curly-haired Uchiha with an eye patch, and a middle-aged Uchiha and hair. Elo Brown was preparing his goals, but the hands on his shoulders stopped his advance. "Stand down, Itachi, Shisui," Masaru ordered Minato, pointing to who was probably one of his newly recruited allies. "Look there." They did so and grimaced at the sight of an unrecognizable white corpse. "What the hell?" Shisui muttered, frowning, as he kept his gun in the holster. "An imposter?" Itachi wondered as the third man simply clicked his tongue and sheathed his sword. "Another group is approaching," the Hinshiriki reported. Ran his thumb through the ninja kanji on his headband. "There is no Zetsu among them this time." Neither he nor Cubism saw an iota in the midst of all this chaos, letting his shadow clones do all the work. Distractedly, Minato wondered how many of them the teenager had hidden in the surrounding forest. Considering that they were in sage mode, he observed the yellow eyes of these two attacking clones, and they were blending in perfectly with nature. He was not surprised that neither of them could perceive them. Kakashi let the tension dissipate from his posture. "It must be Rin's team," he said, adjusting his grip on the deadlift, that is, his best friend. "What about those whom Zetsu imitates?" "Dead, most likely." Minato shook his head. "Another life lost. At least now they knew who was killing their allies." The fox hummed. Considering that the masked man wanted to take Obito Uchiha, it would be wise to assume that they are taking the Uchiha alive. To harvest those damn eyes. Itachi cocked his head slightly. The masked one. Zetsu. Shisui pointed his finger at the Biju, and his innocent gesture earned him a grunt of disgust. Is that the Kyuubi? Minato felt a headache scratching at his head. The infuriating confusion had returned in force now that new members were joining. They are not hostile, he decided to say. As soon as Rin's team arrives, I'll give you a quick summary. Masaru, could you go check on Hudo? What happened to him? The man asked, as his hands lit up with the green chakra of healing as he approached. His vitals are normal, Kakashi pointed out, carefully laying his friend down on the floor. We think he was injected with a tranquilizer. Minato motioned for Itachi to come closer to listen to his report, while Shisui continued to stare at the nine-tailed beast. Are you the real Kyuubi? He couldn't help but ask her. You. Come closer and see for yourself if I'm real or not, Uchiha. No thanks, I'm fine. What a shame. Kurama showed his teeth with a terrifying joy. I could use someone to bite me. I have an itchy tooth. Ha ha ha, the man laughed coldly. I bet you do. A cheerful Uchiha, Naruto pronounced, apparently disturbed by the mere idea. I guess there's a first time for everything. Even to see a cheerful Uchiha. Intrigued, Shisui observed the boy with his gaze. She fixed on her headband a while longer and smiled at him. Have you never seen such a cheerful Uchiha before? What? Did you come from another world or something? He joked. Actually, yes. The man blinked with his one eye. What? We come from another world. Are you serious? What do you think, shall I fence you? Shisui touched his chin and looked thoughtfully at the blonde. That would explain perfectly why you look like you. Naruto couldn't understand this guy. He seemed surprisingly at ease in her presence. So, how did you know he was? He pointed the Uchiha towards the white, dead thing, frowning as he searched for an appropriate word, whatever that is. It's all thanks to Kurama, Naruto replied truthfully. Shisui scratched his cheek. Who is Kurama? I am Kurama. Oh, another team of 3 jumped out of the trees, this time to Uchiha men, led by a woman who didn't seem to belong to their clan. The Kyuubi wrinkled his nose in disgust and scoffed. There's too much stench in the air. I'm going back to the seal, Naruto. Then he quickly disappeared in a cloud of chakra. What's the matter with Obito? The woman asked as soon as she noticed the sleeping man and quickly moved towards him. Reassured, Masaru gave him a curt reply, concentrating on healing Kakashi's wound. It'll be fine, Rin, the white-haired Jounin said sweetly. The woman frowned, her shiny hands slipped by Obito. After a moment, he let the medical technique fade away, his whole body relaxed, and he smiled. Idiot, he murmured fondly, giving the sleeping man a pat on the arm. How are you, Kakashi? Kakashi closed his eyes to reflect her sneaky smile. I'll be fine too. Well, since we're all here, I'll explain a few things, Minato said, catching everyone's attention. Who stood up, ready to listen to their leader. Then we will return to the camp. He looked at the blond boy on the other side of the clearing, his empty, lonely eyes staring into the distance. And his heart skipped a beat. I knew how incredibly bright those blue eyes could be. Full of life and happiness, and I sincerely longed to witness their radiance once more. But he could only stare at this teenager who was his son, and at the same time wasn't. And who looked so much older than he was physically, and so tired to the bone, tired in the same way. That he himself was tired. You're coming with us. Minato wanted to add his name, call him Naruto, but somehow his tongue suddenly refused to cooperate, and just stayed uncomfortably in his mouth. It took Naruto a few seconds to realize that the question was directed at him, and few others more in sorting out their scattered thoughts enough to say yes. Well, he accepted the former yondaime and turned around, returning to his people. If his voice sounded a little forced, no one noticed. Now, listen up. Falling in reverse. They heard Esirama's laughter as soon as they reached the entrance of the cave and crossed the boundary of the barriers. It was just another temporary shelter, a stop for a few days during his endless game of hide and seek with his enemy. The trio looked at each other. Minato looked exasperated, Kakashi looked amused, and Naruto was just curious to know what made Shodai laugh out loud. All the possibilities promised to be just as fun. They entered the huge hole in the mountainside. Sure footsteps crept along the narrow passage, lighted only by the glow of the hidden stamps painted on the walls. Esirama's laughter echoed in his ears as the three men approached. They could already see the light pouring out. The pleasant warm air warmed their icy skin. Soon, the path opened to a spacious cavern. The bonfire in the center cast countless glowing shadows around it, merging and transforming the various forms of stalactites and stalagmites that dotted the vast interior of the cave, creating an eerie and dark environment. The trio shared another look when they saw Tobirama and the Kyuubi clone sitting down on opposite sides of the shogi board. No one paid attention to the team that had just returned from their reconnaissance mission. "You can't just," Tobirama protested, wordlessly pointing to the board in front of him, searching for the right word. It was strange to see the usually serene and serious Nidaime so nervous. To do that. Kurama's fur stood up on top. "And why not?" he growled, his lips pursed into a sneer, and his red eyes narrowed, dangerous. "These," he hit to pieces with his fingernails, "should be able to move wherever they want on this piece of rotten wood. It is ridiculous to suppose that such a small distance would hinder them." Minato laughed covertly. A slight blush covered Naruto's cheeks as he looked at those two pieces of shogi, the king and the golden general. And this one, the Kyuubi, hit another piece, this time a silver general. He would never lag behind the other two. He would pierce the enemy like lightning to reach them. Kakashi's uncomfortable cough was drowned out by another explosive laugh from Esirama, which shook his body with the force. So much so that Naruto feared that this time he would really develop the Edo Tensujutsu. A little longer and I'd probably end up rolling on the floor. The Vihulu boiled over, with pride and grace etched into every movement. "Besides," he said, "this imitation of a battlefield is incomplete." His mouth stretched into a toothy, razor-sharp smile. "The most important thing is missing. Someone great and powerful to take care of the king." Tobirama looked at the fox in utter disbelief. Obviously pleased with his reaction, Kurama puffed up his chest, wagging his tail from side to side. Naruto was reminded of Kakashi's Ninken wagging their tails when they were particularly happy. With trained stubbornness, he ignored the twinge in his chest at the thought of his fallen four-legged companions. The Nidaime took a deep breath to calm down and regain his composure. "It's not in the rules," he tried to reason. "To hell with the rules." The stone walls vibrated with the pure defiance that was reflected in Kurama's growl, as the chakra beast rose from its seat, furious and imposing. Its 9 tails wagged wildly in all directions, responding to the sudden anger of its owner. A fluffy tail swooped forward and unintentionally pushed the shogi board. This one fell on the hard rock, and the sound echoed through the cavern. Silence. Everyone was looking at the scattered pieces with different expressions. Somehow, by a strange stroke of luck, a king and his 2 generals ended up grouped on the ground. "Ha!" The Kyuubi cheered triumphantly, glaring at the man in front of him. So much ruthless joy made Tobirama's head tingle, despite not having the necessary nerves to feel something like that. Naruto smiled at the scene, melancholy swirling in his blue eyes. He remembered that moment. The Okage Nidai decided to teach me Shoji al-Kyuubi while they were exploring. At that time, Esirama should ask what kind of pieces he and his brother would be. What followed was one of the few occasions when Tobirama lost his composure after Kurama picked 2 pebbles at random instead of shogi pieces. Naruto watched intently as Shodai opened his mouth. The shadows moved and twisted. A colossal silhouette loomed over them. The bright red eye looked down. Someone screamed. There was a smell of blood. It hurt. Naruto lowered his gaze to the torrent of blood gushing from his wounds. He raised his hands to cover them more serious, but someone grabbed his wrists and broke them. He looked up. Black tomes dancing in red, an ocean of anger and hatred, a burning passion for destruction. "I die!" Naruto roared. His fingers closed tightly around his enemy's throat, another hand prepared to attack, the Rasen. Of wind was already singing for the blood of the enemy. A strong pull threw him back. The jutsu slipped harmlessly through his fingers. After a brief and disorienting fall, he landed directly on the pile of fluffy hair. And his tails instantly wrapped him in a warm cage. "Let go of me!" Naruto shouted and struggled. To escape, to get out, to kill his enemy, because if he didn't, Obito would hurt him. He would kill him after he killed his last people who were still living. He tried, oh, he tried so many times. "Let go of me, let go of me. Get out of there, Naruto." Too suffocating, too much air in his lungs, he couldn't breathe, couldn't find it, couldn't defend himself. Couldn't protect himself, couldn't escape. It was a dream, kid. Naruto stood still. "Obito is not here, he can't hurt you anymore." An imposing voice surrounded him on all sides, but at the same time gentle and reassuring. The chakra was gently vibrating against her sweaty skin, so refreshing, calming, and full of life. It was nothing like the chakra of that man, perverted and disgusting. A constant buzz of terror in his veins slowly faded to the corners of his mind. The teenager noted the fiery crimson eyes watching him. The concern and the protective instinct were reflected in that look. Not the Sharingan, not a giant, dazzling orb. Not Obito, not Madara, not Jirumi. He exhaled a gentle Kurama, and "I am here." Naruto relaxed, and let his body sink even deeper into the safety of his friend's tail. "I went crazy again." It wasn't a question, just a dry statement. "It wasn't your fault. You fell asleep when we stopped to rest, and you were fine until that damn Uchiha decided to wake you up," Kurama finished with an angry growl, his hair standing on end. "I'll take care of it. Rest here." But one stern look firmed the giant fox, and his jaw closed. "Agreed," granted the boy. "But I want to see." Kurama watched him for a few seconds. A disgusted well, like a warm breath of air, came out of his mouth and went to the face of his Hinchiriki. Naruto's lips curled slightly at the victory in their argument. A small victory, but a victory after all. The situation was not good. It could have been worse, Minato thought. The boy might not have stopped, and Obito would have been injured. Who was he kidding? His student would have died for sure. The wind Rasengan would have torn him apart, and no one was close enough at that precise moment to stop him. Minato shouldn't have let Obito wake the boy up, but the Uchiha was extremely excited to learn that this blonde teenager was really Naruto. He was supposed to be the young Namikaze's sensei, after all, and he loved his son as if he were his own. That's why Minato relented, despite knowing that Naruto didn't like his enthusiastic student. And now they were in this situation. Obito was pinned against the tree, his throat under Naruto's powerful grip. Although it did not completely suffocate him, he felt visibly uncomfortable. The Uchiha held the child's wrist and pointed the cradle at him and at the heart. Minato was holding the boy's second hand, the one that just a few moments ago had a deadly chakra ball still spinning. Too close to your student. If he decided to reactivate the Rasengan, the consequences would be disastrous. Naruto didn't move, he just remained motionless like a statue. Minato doubted that the multiple blades threatening various parts of his body were the real reason. He had to squeeze the cradle and three-pronged, but the slight tremor persisted. This was his son. Maybe not his real son, but his son after all. And he had his gun pressed to his son's neck, ready to defend the scant remnants of what he might call his family. The world really loved playing with him. Minato tried to prepare his heart for what he might have to do. Would I really be able to do it? Honestly, I had no answer. The man looked at those red, vulpine eyes, strangely focused on death. But obviously without seeing it. His gaze turned to his student, who was frowning in confusion over his slowly rotating Sharingan eyes. The Uchiha remained motionless, not wanting to irritate the teenager further. Kakashi's gaze burned Minato's mind. The blonde guy sensed the man's hesitation at the angle of his katana, ready to take the guy down, but at the same time not quite. Rin stared at his sensei, a silent pleading in his big eyes. All the while her hand was resting on a vital point of the teenager's body, with green chakra covering her fingers, ready to take a life instead of saving it. The rest of their 5 companions surrounded them, Dojutsu activated, minds alert and bodies ready to enter the battle at any moment. This was bad. Naruto was a well-trained ninja with vast experience and, in addition, a Hinshiriki. A Hinshiriki who had the full support of his Biju. The fight with him would be devastating, not only in the physical aspect. This was his son. A ray of sunshine and brimming with energy that everyone loved and appreciated at a time when the world still made sense. They would continue to fight Naruto if necessary, of course, but it would irreparably break their hearts. His morale was already very low. Minato gritted his teeth and cursed in his mind. Naruto blinked. All eyes were instantly turned to the boy's face, and his muscles tensed. The young blonde man's lips twisted into a cruel snarl. Uchiha scum. A shiver ran down Minato's back. It definitely wasn't the guy who was talking. He recognized that deep, vile voice. The Kirumi. Panic was coursing through his veins. This was terrible. Naruto leaned forward, completely indifferent to the edge of the cradle and the older blonde, who was sinking deeper into his flesh. The blood pooled on the touchline and then ran down his neck. Minato almost dropped his weapon when he suddenly felt that the grip was molten metal. He had to summon all his willpower not to throw it as far as possible. Obito was stiff as a board, the red of the Sharingan contrasting with the demonic red. The Hinshiriki was so close that he could feel his hot breath on his face, which made him even more nervous. "Don't go near Naruto," the Kyuubi warned in a deceptively mild, but decidedly deadlier tone. "Or next time I won't stop him." "But why me?" Obito asked, his voice slightly broken. "Why does he hate me so much?" The sudden surge of overwhelming murderous intent almost brought most of the group to their knees. The fox's crimson irises held Lucia's gaze firmly, and the pressure of his fingers on her throat increased slightly. Minato himself could feel the sweat pooling on his skin. Rin seemed to want to vomit, and the fear was reflected in Kakashi's gray eyes as his katana trembled against Naruto's neck. The Kyuubi didn't seem to notice anything. Because, he uttered the word slurring his words, there was a man who killed everyone he knew. He burned his whole world. The humans, the villages, the trees, the sky. He leaned even closer and whispered in her ear. "Can you guess what his name was?" At the look of absolute horror on the man's face, Naruto's sneer turned into a fierce smile. "That's right. His name was Obito Uchiha." The silence that followed that revelation was absolutely deafening. Everyone looked at the Hinshiriki with expressions of horror and disbelief. "You killed his parents the day he was born. You chased him for years. You did him unimaginable harm. You tortured his sensei in front of him." He growled then, a guttural, savage sound that had no place in a human's throat. "Your presence, your smell, your damn eyes, everything. We hated everything about you." Obito's face was as white as paper, dejected and crushed by that information. "Stay away from Naruto," the Kyuubi demanded firmly. "If you have to approach him, send Kakashi or Minato. Those two will do." He finally released Lucha, but no one made the gesture to return the gesture. He shot a meaningful glance at the older blonde. "Do you really love your son from Goya?" Minato didn't back down or flinch. He almost pulled away abruptly. Everyone else also stepped back, shocked and tired, to let the Hinshiriki retreat. And Naruto, and no, the Kyuubi was clearly reveling in all his despair, mockery and resentment, dripping from every line of the boy's youthful features. After that strangely civilized first encounter, they seemed to let their guard down and deceive themselves. The Kyuubi was an immensely powerful being of pure chakra, centuries old. Famous for being the embodiment of fury and malice. He didn't stop being one just by making an effort to be a little polite. It seemed that the only thing stopping the Kyuubi from slaughtering them all was his friendship with Naruto. His desire to give him a place in this new unknown world. For the same reason, Obito had been forgiven several times. If he was killed, no one would accept him. Minato tried to calm his trembling hands. The test was unsuccessful, as he couldn't take his eyes off the thin red line just below Naruto's chin. He shed the blood of his own son. Understanding sank into his soul like a piece of ice. He was protecting his student, of course, but he still pointed his gun at his son and prepared to kill him if necessary. What kind of person had he become? If Kushina was still with him, she would certainly have brought him to his senses. She would know what to do in this situation. God missed her. The man's heart shrank painfully at the memory of it. The blood and the tears. The image of his wife desperately hugging the cold corpse of her son as her own life faded away. Slowly into nothingness, the image that still haunted him every time he closed his eyes to rest. He raised a hand and placed it over his eyes to try to rebuild himself into something like Mikaze Minato, the previous Yondaime Hokage, and the current leader of the rebellion that people desperately needed in these times. Dark times. Rin's compassionate voice reached Minato's ears as she murmured soothing words to a deeply distressed death. Someone touched his shoulder, and he quickly opened his eyes to see Kakashi staring at him. Stressed and exhausted. Worried. Damn, he had to control himself. His people needed a leader, not a self-hating failure. Stop looking at me with those disgusting eyes. Suddenly the Kyuubi growled. Then he paused and stretched his host's lips into another predatory smile. Or not. I will gladly recreate the Uchiha massacre in your world. It would be fun. The 5 Uchiha looked down in an instant, discussing something among themselves in a low voice and with high-pitched hisses. The Vihulu did not even try to hide his disappointment at his immediate obedience. He clicked his tongue and scuttled to the edge of the clearing, where he leaned against the tree with his arms folded, watching the agitated humans with the kind of conceit that only an ancestral being possessed. The Uchiha massacre. Wonderful. His own dimension was already so messed up. What kind of story did Naruto's world have to live through? What kind of life did your son have? Apparently, he was an orphan from birth and went through many difficulties. Oh, and Minato's student, one of the kindest people I had ever met, was evil. That's great news. Sensei. Minato sighed, rubbing his forehead. They had already decided to abandon the inevitable telling of their respective stories by returning to the main camp. Those white Zetsu creatures, as Naruto called them, could have easily infiltrated his current home. Their people and their families were in grave danger. Without his son's ability to distinguish the enemy, they had no chance of surviving this time. Minato let out a sigh, shaking his insides. We'll have to be more careful, he said, pursing his lips. Gradually, his mind started working again. Obito was their enemy, and it is obvious that his presence is similar to them. If we look at it from his point of view, his hostility is understandable. It would be nice if we kept Obito away. Kakashi scratched the back of his head thoughtfully. I guess to the others to Uchiha. Just in case. The blonde agreed. Although I think Obito is the main problem. Minato's gaze unconsciously drifted to the blonde young man standing nearby. Judging by the color of her irises, the Kyuubi still controlled her body. Worry took over his chest. What happened to Naruto? He's resting. Minato and Kakashi repressed a shudder at the statement that neither of them expected. I will accompany you for the moment instead of Naruto. The corner of the Hinchiriki's mouth curved. Take care of me. Minato narrowed his eyes when he saw the Biju, but he only received an innocent wink. Quite disturbing, to say the least. The Kyuubi was obviously playing with them, but it felt more like, I wasn't even sure how it felt. Almost joking came to his mind, but he dismissed it as soon as the idea came to his mind. Kakashi seemed equally puzzled by an abrupt change in Kirumi's attitude. The Bijulu rolled his eyes dramatically, however, offered no further comment. Minato shook his head. The QB from the parallel dimension was giving him a headache. He saw Obito's dark gaze fixed on him, so he reached over to make sure his student was okay. Knowing Obito, he was probably already overwhelmed with unfounded guilt for what his alternate version did to Naruto. And he probably had every intention of doing everything he could to make up for it, if given the chance. Obito could relentlessly harass anyone with his impulsive kindness and overwhelming kindness, until he managed to break through their walls and defenses and reach their hearts. Kakashi was a clear example of his stubbornness to become friends with someone. Obito called Minato softly. "How are you feeling?" Lucia's eyes instantly fell to the ground. Rin groaned in frustration. "Sensei, please tell this idiot of a husband of mine that he shouldn't feel guilty about what happened to Naruto." "Obito, it's not your fault." But what?" The blonde asked sternly. "Do you want to bear all the sins of others?" Obito suddenly raised his head, opened his mouth, and his fury seemed to explode. But he never did. After an instant, he deflated, going from an explosive anger to a state of despondency. "I, the one from the Naruto world, am really evil. I mean, the QB said that I killed his parents." His voice trailed off. A strange expression crossed his face, and he looked at his sensei with a blank stare, begging for an explanation. "Why would he do that? We are not the same person." "Why is that? How could I kill you or Kushina-san?" "It's just that the you of that world did all that, but listen, Obito," Minato said, giving his student a light shoulder squeeze in sign of support. "Each person is shaped by his experiences, the decisions he makes throughout his life. Something must have happened that diverted the other's death from yours, and you two turned out to be completely different identities." And yes. Iluchia swallowed hard. "What if I become evil?" he whispered. "If my other self did it, who says I won't do it?" Rin looked at him with a frown. "Don't be ridiculous, Obito." With such genuine fear on his face, Obito looked so young, Minato reflected. He didn't look like a man in his 30s. I knew why I was afraid, and I felt compassion for him. If there was a possibility, however small or plausible, that he would turn on his family and friends, that would certainly shock him deeply, especially with the obvious hatred that Naruto felt towards him, despite not being the same person. Our worlds are not the same. The same people turn out different, Obito, Minato said, unable to hide the sadness that was drawn in his blue eyes. This teenage version of my son is the best example of how diverse they can be. The Uchiha wilted with a different kind of guilt. You should also remember that this guy participated in an active battle just a few days ago. He's still alive in her. Minato continued to calm his students' concerns. Give it time. He will get to know you and he will see that, whatever version of Obito he met, you are not him. Ma, I don't know anything about that, Kakashi-sensei interjected. Obito is bent on making my life as miserable as possible. That's a clear sign of someone very evil. Rin smiled when Obito became enraged at the obvious mockery. Shut up, Kakashi's going. Not to mention that Ichika he keeps hiding under. Shut up. Obito squealed, his face red to the roots of his hair. Or I'll shut you up myself. Kakashi pulled away from him. I knew you were a very evil being. He babbled. You didn't have to be a ninja to realize his fake shrinking. Obito glared at him, but then an idea occurred to him, and he smiled mischievously. Reading Ichika wouldn't mean that you're evil too. The other Jounin cocked his head, thoughtful. I guess you're right. He straightened up, slouching lazily with his hands in his pockets. Then, we can be evil friends. Or something like that. Before that, a sweet, very sweet voice intervened. So sweet that their teeth hurt. Come on, honey, what's the matter with Icha? And don't tell me you left it where our son can find it. Of course not. He defended himself indignantly. She got goosebumps by unintentionally admitting to having done it. To have concealed not by. Rin, calm down. I can explain it. His wife simply arched an eyebrow. It's his fault. Kakashi stammered. Turning his furious gaze on his friend, he looked at him treacherously. Minato watched the three of them, the blue in his eyes shining with amusement. His team was fine now. They had each other, so they would still be fine. He turned to a silent shadow standing next to him. Itachi, are we ready to go? Yes, Minato-san, the young clan chief replied. We've already packed up the whole camp. The blonde gave him a look full of gratitude and apology. She was glad that the Uchiha gave them a moment to get ready. Then, both of them froze when they heard the deep voice that could be heard right behind them. The Kirib was smiling from ear to ear, too cheerful for it to be an accident. Can we finally